Okay. Thanks, Christine. It's good to have everybody here. See some smiling faces amid all of this. Um, as Ed was saying, these incidents have happened in the past, and uh, every time they happen, they probably invoke some change in our behavior. So we use it as a tool moving forward. And if you had to write it down, you'd say, due to insert crisis here, we're now going to change the way we do business. So obviously, in this case, especially with the focus today, is what has changed amid COVID-19. So regardless of the crisis, it's not the crisis du jour, but I don't know what French is for year or period. These things just change and reoccur. So it happens without our control. So that's why I kind of took on the title, How the Universe Reminds Us to Take Care of Ourselves, and why we should take another look at how we conduct our daily operations. So among these past events that have affected our future behavior, come in essentially two different categories. First, let's look at the natural and weather-related categories. All right, so one, of course, that affects all of us is hurricanes and flooding. Well, obviously, we're a water-related profession, so we've been subject to hurricanes and the subsequent flooding. What did we learn from it? How did it affect our facilities? Did it teach us to maybe keep a stockpile of sandbag making material on site? Do we go above and beyond if the budget's allowed and install flood doors for our vulnerable structures within the plant, the ones that lie low, protect pump stations, things of that sort? Monitoring the system, restricting access to roadways or whatever. There's a lot of tools that you can use to compare notes from past events and look forward. Snow events, freezing and thawing for our water audience type thing. It's usually when most of the water mains breaks occur. So snow events, you think, what's the big deal? Well, it has an impact on your operations. If the big snow events, not everybody's going to make it into the plant. That should only happen once or twice before you start saying, listen, we know this storm is coming. How about we're going to mandate a certain number of people spend the night here before the storm or whatever. Again, what do you need access to? You kind of prioritize those things. What's really important to have access to? Conduct your snow removal in those areas first, and going on down the list, you take care of the other stuff later. Don't forget to stock your things. Do you have the equipment, the de-icing material, so on and so forth? How about heat waves? Summertime's a great time to get a lot of this outside work done as far as building maintenance, clearing right-of-ways, things of that sort. It's really great. However, we're now towards the end, hopefully, of our third heat wave this summer. Is it really fair for us to ask our staff to operate at 100% out in these heat waves and keep on keeping on type thing? How about this? Keep a little tricks up your sleeve, maybe some inside work that they can do. There's plenty of things that can be done in there. Keep them out of the elements and help protect them. Sometimes you do have things that absolutely have to be done. Can you start earlier when it's cooler? Are you gonna, on your own, stockpile more either bottled water or Gatorade, something to keep your people, safe and healthy? Consider that. How about drought? How does that affect how we operate our facilities? Water more so than wastewater, except if you want to really contribute. If you're spraying your clarifiers or hosing your tanks, are you using potable water? Should you switch to utility water type thing? On the water side, certainly we're going to ask our customers to contribute by cutting down on their water use. Let's move on to man-made disasters. Not that somebody's out there planning, ooh, how can I really screw things up for these guys? But man-made disasters, these things fall in the category where it had some kind of human influence. First off, let's talk about hazmat. Those of you that are, there seems to be a large percentage, I think, those in this industry probably have some exposure to the first response profession. We often think of hazmat in terms of transportation incidents, crashes on the roadways or railways. Well, when the product spills on the ground, where is it going to go? Is it going to go in the storm sewer? Is it going to go in the sanitary sewer? Is it going to go down a water course towards either a stream that could be used for a water intake, or is it going to, influence perhaps a wellhead someplace? So, just start to think of how to protect your facilities, and again, most importantly, your staff. You'll hear that as a recurring theme, of course. Now, couple that. What's the next one? We think fire and explosion. Well, all right, they seem like very localized incidents. However, if we mix these two together, you'll have some industrial sites that either experience one or the other, the fire and explosion. Well, firefighters come and they're trained to put the wet stuff on the red stuff. Okay, simple enough. However, once that water either extinguishes the fire, what else did it come in contact with? What's in that industry? We have things like, SARA Title II, where maybe your emergency management people know what it is, but, sometimes wastewater and water are kind of an afterthought for this. Personally, I had the opportunity or incident to be called out to Gettysburg, actually, believe it or not, when I was with Exeter. There, they had a fire and explosion at, the Miller Fertilizer Company. No relation, thank you. However, still the same thing, that it became a surround and drown scenario. So they have deluge operations going on, pouring copious amounts of water on this building. And at that point, it's stand back and watch. And I think somebody, hanging around, one of the engines, once the water started running out of the building, that's the other thing too. Do these buildings have floor drains? Where's that water going then too, once it's contaminated? But this water was actually running out of the building, running over their boots and down a gutter, until somebody thought, uh-oh, that all this muck is running towards a stream. And just downstream, about 1.5 miles, is a water intake. Yikes, what are we going to do? So that can be part of your community planning. There they were able to mobilize heavy equipment, bulldozers, build dikes, things like that. Why was I there? Because then once they, collected and accumulated these, couple million gallons worth of contaminated, at this point, wastewater, can they go with it? So DEP called us at Exeter and said, if we start hauling, can you take it? And the answer was yes. What's next? Acts of terrorism. The big one, of course, we think of is 9/11. Well, okay, that was in New York, and it was limited to perhaps 3 different sites. May or may not have affected us. However, the course that we now take, and that it's required as part of our licensure, is the facility security course. How do we look at our facilities and either harden the security? Do we need double fencing? Do we need better locking systems on our facilities, pump stations, remote or otherwise? Do we need video cameras? How can we monitor them? Okay, so all that was predicated on what came out of 9/11, that and a bunch of other training. Looking at it on a smaller scale, what could very likely impact you? An active shooter scenario. It doesn't always come in the form of somebody with a gun. It could just be somebody driving a vehicle their intent is to cause some harm. But the thing you have to remember with this: run, hide, fight. If you're going to run, where are you going to run to? And have you thought about this in your facilities? If you're going to hide, maybe you already have those sites picked out. Just saying. And could they be used? If that doesn't work out, do you have a place to escape from there? And then fight. That means you fight with everything you have. If faced with that, are there fire extinguishers nearby that you could discharge and then use them as a weapon? Perhaps, if it really comes to that. But these are the things that you have to think about ahead of time. In the past, there have been viral outbreaks. Okay, Ed had mentioned HIV. What did we change then? Okay, there's the obvious of what we're probably all thinking about, but then one of the other aspects came out, all the bloodborne pathogen training we have, just the incidental contact with bodily fluids. We're wastewater. Guess what we deal with? Bodily fluids. So then there was always the question, how survivable is this virus in wastewater, and what precautions are we going to take to deal with that? H1N1 and H5N1, all right, between either the bird flu, the swine flu, or whatever, through these, and these were not so long ago, but out of this came all of a large effort concentrated to pandemic planning. In really any facilities you can count on. If it really gets bad, how are you going to conduct business with 50% workforce reduction? That means if we have half the amount of people, how are we going to get all this work done? Or if we have half the amount of people, what work really needs to get done? So you start prioritizing your duties and your essential functions as far as the business is concerned, and deal with that. Stocking resources to be able to protect your workers again. West Nile virus, there's another one where, okay, you're smacking mosquitoes and everything else, but what are we doing these days to prevent that? You're looking at some, accumulated water, whether it be in a flower pot, in the bottom of a cistern, or an unused tank at the time. The little drain sumps. How long has that tank been out of operation? Should we get rid of that standing water in there? A large effort went into spraying in areas where there's standing water, whether it be around trails or somewhere in the community environment. And here we are at COVID-19. What the heck are we going to do with this? Well, here's some ideas. Everything that you've heard up to this point works. Wash your hands, wear a face mask, practice social distancing. Okay, it's not, it's really not that hard. The problem we're seeing now, of course, we have another spike because we as a society got lazy. We've had it up to here. We're spoiled Americans. We want to go out and play. Even within our facilities, I think we're slacking off, to be honest. And I think there's a little bit of a mentality as, why work around these guys all the time? None of us got sick. We must be okay. However, when all of those people leave, do you know everybody that they're being exposed to, and who those people are getting exposed to, and so on and so on and so on? Well, if you can't accurately answer that question, then you should probably put your mask back on and protect yourself and others by taking those safeguards. All of those scenarios are beyond our control, and they teach us, or they remind us, how do we plan, respond, and recover from these incidents and their effects on us. Okay, so it's taking the time and using resources. You may not have any clue, but there's certainly through this organization and others, you have a network of people with varied experience. Perhaps they can help. We're among that bunch. So I say, let's take it down a notch. How do we plan, respond, and recover to these things, but on a more personal level? Okay, how does it affect me? Well, one of the things you can do is taking a more active part in developing, or if you already have a safety program, let's revisit it and pay more attention to it. Christine, of course I didn't start my clock, so give me that nudge, we talked about when I need it.
Yeah, do you know what? You're at quarter after the hour, and since I just interrupted, the password is work boots. That's work boots. So you're quarter after the hour right now, 15 minutes left.
One boot or two? Work boots?
It's two boots. Work boots.
Work boots, everybody.
Yep.
I'll say, so getting back to safety programs, I mean, there's a couple essential elements that you want to pay attention to. First off, there's a job safety analysis, or a JSA. What the heck is that? Well, it's a safety tool that can be used to define and control hazards associated with certain process, job, or procedure. Okay, that's nice for a definition, but it's a step-by-step look at everything that you do come in contact to perform any of those jobs, just as it says. Think about what we do in a plant on a routine basis that we just either do by muscle memory or whatever. Sometimes we do that and we're half asleep. Nothing wrong with that as long as you can do it safely. But start with these routine tasks. We check out our plan every day. Look at where we walk. What are we encountering? Are we encountering slippery walkways or trip hazards, things of that sort? How about sample collection? We're obviously exposed to wastewater samples or water or chemicals around the plant site. Are we data collection? That really refers to, in my mind, being one of the older guys, actually going out and getting a meter reading. Because keep in mind, not everybody has or wants, if you can believe it, SCADA systems in their systems. So regardless of what the restriction is, whether it's that personal preference or budgetary, people actually have to go out and look at a meter and record it on a check chart. That's fine, but what are you encountering there? Whether it's you're out in your collection system or distribution system, and do you have to drive down some different terrain lane to get these meters at a remote pump station? Take a look at that. Lab procedures should go without mention, of course, all the hazards that you're dealing with there in terms of samples and reagents and chemicals in the lab. How can you minimize your exposure there? Operational procedures, hosing tanks. Can we have more connection points and less hose laying around the joint to trip over? How about skimming tanks, things like that? Are you able to do this without reaching awkwardly? And if you are, how can you correct that? Both in plant and your collection system. All right, so along with this, what are we looking for when we do this? How do we identify the hazards? Well, the ones that are around you, not necessarily what you're doing, but what is your exposure to these things? Think of your senses. What does that mean? Well, what do you see? Are the things that affect your sight? Did you not see that thing that you just tripped over? Was it obscured by something else? Is the lighting okay in the facility? How about sound? Is it loud as heck in here? Should you be wearing hearing protection? Things of that sort. Or is there something else? You visit these places every day. What do you hear different today that was different from yesterday? Maybe the sound coming out of a motor. Is a bearing going bad? Is some other piece of machinery about to, go the wrong way and maybe cause injury to somebody? Who knows? Touch. Are you encountering things that are either hot or sharp or somehow injurious to you? Pay attention to those things. Odors. If you smell something that you didn't smell, pay attention to it. Also be aware that if you smelled something when you first went into the place and now all of a sudden you don't smell it, doesn't necessarily mean that the hazard went away, because of course being exposed to different chemicals deaden your olfactory senses. So the hazard's still there, you just can't smell them. Somebody new comes walking in and says, "Oh my gosh, you know, how can you stand it in here?" And you say, "Why? Why do you say that?" It's like, you don't smell that? No, that's trouble. Get out. Okay, more on the environmental hazard side. You know, again, look at your body mechanics of how you're doing that. Are you properly lifting things? Are you awkwardly reaching over railings or something like that? How can you correct the situation that maybe you don't have to do that? Because, you know, we're all getting younger, right? Slip, trip, and fall conditions. Hey, put your tools away, wrap your hoses up, things like that. And again, in identifying hazards, look at how you do things. A good way to do this is bring somebody else along to you and say, okay, I don't need you to tell me about it while it's happening, but watch me do this. Let's watch each other and we'll just take notes, because again, we're doing things from muscle memory. We may not even realize we're doing something in a somewhat stupid fashion. But again, pay attention to every little thing. So examine your actions. Once you've collected all that data, how are you going to correct it? Well, we have two ways of doing that in the safety program, and it involves administrative and engineering controls. Let's talk about administrative controls, and pardon me whizzing along in this, but we're going to make this deadline. So an administrative control, rules, policies, and procedures governing actions or conditions of the workplace. That's when you get the notice, or maybe you have a procedure that's now posted, you talk about it and you post it. This is how we're going to handle this hazard or conduct our business. Examples of that: mandating the use of PPE. Can't be overstated. It's a relatively inexpensive thing that can have a return that is beyond calculation. And besides, if nothing else, you're worth it. Would you not agree? A reporting mechanism. If you see something, say something. You often hear that phrase, but what does it really mean? How am I going to report something? Who am I going to report it to that has some influence over correcting the situation to begin with? Whether it's your supervisor or otherwise, find out, you know, what that mechanism is. Do you have a suggestion box? This is a really good thing for people to do. If you're afraid to speak up, sometimes they'll sneak around and maybe have a great idea to correct something, but they'll want to be, you know, secret about putting it in the box. It's a great tool for the safety environment. Periodically go in that suggestion box and pull some out. Maybe provide some incentive for the guys to, you know, make suggestions. You know, a token gift card to Home Depot, or you know your staff, figure it out. You know, how can they you know, reap the reward or recognition providing a decent suggestion? Consider something like that. Obviously there's training involved that you're going to have to figure out. You're going to find some things that you just need to brush up on, so look at your resources to get some training for that. And lastly on this list, well, it's not last, but form a safety committee. Talk to your insurance carrier for your workers' comp. If you form a safety committee, they're not that hard to meet the basic requirements. You meet once a month, you take minutes, you have some annual training of how to really cover everything we just talked about here, identifying work hazards, things of that sort. And with that, you can likely be entitled to a 5% reduction in your workers' comp. Sometimes that's a big enough number to get somebody's attention. Engineering controls. This is the physical, well, let's look at the definition. Efforts to remove hazardous conditions. What does that mean? It could mean the actual, the physical thing that you can see, the tangible thing, that placing barriers between workers and the hazard. Does that mean putting up a railing? Does that mean diverting a walkway away someplace? Improving lighting, improving the acoustics somewhere. You know, all right, in general, we could just say improving the ambient conditions. Christine, where are we at?
Yep, we're at 25 after the hour. So if you want to wrap it up in the next minute or so, and we can take any questions that people have.
Again, looking at your senses, what can you improve? Lighting, ventilation, and walking services, things like that. Look at tool and equipment storage, especially flammable liquids or chemical storage. How can you keep them out of harm's way? If you can't avoid it, how can you keep somebody else from being exposed? You have signage, appropriate signage for those areas or temporary workplaces. Keep that in mind. Even something as simple as cones, guards and railings, don't take off those guards around rotating couplings, for goodness sake. When you're leaning over them in your unzipped hoodie and all of a sudden you find yourself part of the machine. It's not funny. I've seen it. I've had patients that have, in my line of work as a paramedic in the past, that have become, victim to things like that. And improving housekeeping. It sounds with everything else. I once had somebody tell me early on, and I won't mention Ralph's initials, but if you're paying attention to simple housekeeping around your facility, there's a good chance that you're of the mindset you're going to be worried about the bigger things as well. What are the goals of a safety program? Obviously, protecting yourself and your family. Don't forget about them, because they like having you around, whether you realize it or not. Protecting your coworkers, and in some cases, protecting your customers. Remember, with all of this, the number one safety goal in the workplace is making sure you go home safe and sound. With that, does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, feel free. Either you can submit it via the chat or just unmute yourself. You're welcome to pose any questions to H. David. I know I've got a couple. Anyone? Okay, so I'll kick things off. H. David, you brought up the JSAs, the job safe, or wait, what is it? Job
safety analysis.
Yeah, you're bringing back memories for me, because I think my past 2 jobs as a contractor, there were a lot of times where had my workers going out to different job sites. And so it's pretty cool, because when I'd write them up, there's just an Excel spreadsheet and thinking through step by step, what are they doing on a daily basis? So I assume if you're trying to do one of those and have it valid for COVID, you're just adding a few lines, thinking about all the different times you're too close together, or there's shared touch points, and that's in the sanitation. So not really, a bunch of stuff you should be adding to the JSA, but if you're already thinking in the method of how to craft one, it should be pretty easy to come up with what the other tasks are you need. Would you agree?
That's correct. And again, past roles as an emergency manager type thing, we had documents that were, 10 inches thick, because you had something to do that. How do you respond to a tornado? How do you respond to a hurricane? How do you respond to this, that, and the other thing? And guess what? Earlier in the presentation, when I said insert incident here, the rest of the wording was all the same, because your priorities are the same and what you're trying to protect and how you're going to proceed. So then it became an all risk document, where it doesn't matter what it is, your priorities, and your procedures are still going to be the same. So we all, once you identify what the risks are with these different things and how you handle it, your process is still the same.
Okay, excellent. Any other questions? Okay, I will pose one more, and then we'll move over to the next speaker. So, H. David, as far as the time you're spending with clients and people out there, what sort of safety tools, gear, stuff, what are people struggling to find right now? Or has it been easy enough to find, at this point, find hand sanitizer and masks and that sort of thing? What's short on supply that you're hearing about?
Well, fortunately, especially the ones that I deal with, I mean, it's the same ones that you hear on the news sometimes, but in that they're dealing with some of these vendors where it's really hard to buy a singular container of anything. They typically are buying in bulk to begin with. So fortunately, at the beginning of all this, when the mass hysteria was to run to the grocery store or Amazon or whatever to get these things, most of the clients that I have say, I already have 3 boxes of them, and things of that. So, because they said, hey, I get a price break, I'm looking ahead, I don't care what's coming down the road, I'm going to be ready. and good for them.
Okay, excellent. So I just, I have the power, so I stopped your screen share, H. David. Thank you so
You
much
have
for
the
that
power.
interesting presentation on safety.